On the 2nd of June, Astride, the up-and-coming realistic horse game from Raidho, finally launched its early access to the masses, and to say it was badly received is a bit of an understatement. After waiting for over a year, the entire early access release was essentially a horse creator, a paddock, an arena, and a jumping mechanic that wasn't explained or even well implemented. And there was no sound. And all of this for $25, which isn't exactly steep so much as damned expensive. At least we could share this disappointment together in the service. Apart from the $25 price tag and lack of features, another problem comes in the form of the Kickstarter trailer, which gave a much different idea of what the game would be. This trailer had given the impression that the game was up to this point of development, which is why a lot of players decided to back them. And the release of Ranch of Rivershine in mid-May, also in early access, did not help matters at all, giving players a game to point to and say, yes, this is what a game should look like in early access. We can certainly understand why people are angry, furious, ticked off, and everything in between. When I went into the game myself, I was not exactly impressed. The graphics look good, and I can certainly enjoy making a horse, but the gameplay itself was not really there. So I took to Discord, but oh boy, there were a lot of people way ahead of me. Both on the Discord and the Steam page, people are making their voices heard about this terrible launch. And are we surprised? After a whole year of waiting and money invested, this is all we get. Yeah, disaster of a launch is definitely an accurate statement. However, on Monday, Astride finally made a statement addressing this, and we're going to go through it to kind of see why all this happened in the first place, what's their plans for the future, and should you continue backing the game. I myself was a backer, and I've been an advent supporter of this game. If you follow this channel, you should know. So for me, this hits damn hard. I got emotionally invested, but I always felt that Astride was very open with their community, and with the statement, they didn't exactly disappoint. The statement goes into a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, their government funding, and explains the Kickstarter trailer as well. But let's rather dive into it and see what it is. They open up by saying they are listening to the feedback given so far and appreciate the constructive criticism, and are working to make improvements where they can. They also promise a roadmap for the next phase. The entire opening confirms they are at least listening to the players, but I'll expand on this a little later. I do feel the roadmap should have been launched alongside the release of the early access, as this would have helped alleviate a lot of the upset, because it would have given players an idea of what's to come and might have calmed down some of them. But let's rather dive straight into the meat of things. Why was Astride released so early in development? We know and recognize that Astride is premature in its early access launch, and we understand that there has been a lot of confusion as to why we would release Astride in this early state. Developing Astride has not been an easy journey, so at least they do understand and acknowledge that the game is not up to standard. No defending the state of the game, no yes buts, just a clear, the game was released premature. It is pretty rare to see horse game developers take accountability and admit fault, so I do appreciate this. There have been a lot of setbacks beyond our control, and we would like to address this. After Green Horse joined the team in March, we initially decided to start fresh with the programming of the game, as what had already been made was simply not viable. We revised our plans and made changes we believe and still believe were for the better. Let's pause here and head on over to the Patreon post so that we can see what they're talking about. And I quote, "Prototypes are not meant to survive into production. Many indie game companies do this incorrectly and build their game on top of the prototype they made in the beginning without realizing they're slowly moving into a production phase. This is dangerous because of something we call technical debt. Problems we as programmers constantly push to fix later but never have the time or energy to do. Restarting the project when production starts is a good ritual to have, and it allows us to get a fresh start to make a nice foundation for ourselves to build the game on top of. This, coincidentally, overlaps with a surprise from Unity. We expected to keep using a beta version of a framework until next year, but Unity gave us a surprise with the full release of this framework in September. In a nutshell, the data-oriented technology stacks DOTS makes it possible for us to make performant, high-fidelity games with the size of the team we have." End quote. It boils down to this: they had to start over twice, and not for inconsequential reasons. The first was to rebuild and ensure they have no tech debt at a later stage. For those wondering what tech debt is, I encourage you to go and look at bugs from SSO to get a feel for how broken a game can get with tech debt, although well done to SSO for finally fixing your bugs. The second reason was one out of their control. Unity decided to add dots earlier than expected, and they had to completely rework a lot of the older groundwork to fit in with this new framework. Basically, Unity forced their hand. So that would be 2 restarts in the span of less than 6 months, and that is not exactly an easy thing to overcome, and does explain at least somewhat why the game came out in the state it did. And they have one programmer working on the code. Overall, I feel worried that they had such a rough production thus far, but I do feel their transparency about those problems is giving me some hope for the game as a whole. My main concern is the fact that they hadn't communicated this earlier, but we'll get to that in a bit. Let's continue. The initial release date of Astride's early access was initially set for December 2022. However, this was made under different circumstances and with a smaller scope in mind. We have contracts that we are obligated to follow, and we unfortunately cannot elaborate on this, although we wish we could. As we have received government funding, we have to follow the dates initially set. We were lucky enough to be able to extend the release date by 6 months without risking our funding. Earlier this year, we were granted more funding for the next phase starting in June, but Astride had to be released as an early access title on Steam to receive this funding. We would like to emphasize that if we could, we would have extended the release by another year, but to be able to ensure the future of Astride, we had to release now, knowing that there would be heat about the lack of features. Government funding sounds like a difficult thing to manage, to be honest. I'm glad they pushed through to see Astride land on Steam and get the funding, but I am rather disappointed that it had to happen under these circumstances. Astride knew how the players would feel about this launch. They were and are aware that the game is not up to snuff. Considering everything that has happened, a part of me is kind of happy the game was even launched, and the other part wonders what Astride would have been had they not seen those setbacks. It's a sort of sad moment here for me. Now let's pause and talk about funding for a second. A lot of people have felt that because Astride receives funding, this means they are scammers, because the game that came out was nothing like what was promised at the start of the Kickstarter, and they are just hoarding money or whatever you think game developers do with excess money. The only way indie developers can work full-time on games is if they receive funding to cover those living expenses. Whether this be through a company, a government, a day job, a very patient and friendly grandma, or Kickstarter. Receiving money is a fundamental part in making games, especially of a larger scope. Smaller games can be made by one person as a hobby, but even then, for larger scopes, it can take absolutely years before we see the full product. However, receiving funding does make you far more accountable to your players. The second they start giving you money, your responsibility to produce the product increases tenfold, and the product did not reflect what the players had paid for, which is why we are upset. And they continue. We did our best to put our statements about the current state of Astride and what could be expected from the release, and we realized that we should have done more to emphasize that Astride is still in premature stage. For this we apologize, and we will do our best to make up for it. We are staying as transparent as we possibly can. Yes, this was your biggest mistake, and the part I believe people are the most upset about. That and the $25 price tag. They should have released the Patreon posts from day one. They should have been open about those issues behind the scenes to give people an accurate idea of what is going on and let them know why the product would not be what they expected at first. This was a big stumble, but they are promising to do better, and they do apologize. That's at least something. Now let's get into the Kickstarter trailer situation. And they say, the Kickstarter trailer that was made last year was essentially put together as a proof of concept. While everything was recorded in-game, it was not a well-functioning game. We understand how having early in-game footage in the video was misleading. When this trailer was made, it was early in-game footage, but as explained, revised and restarted. Considering what was said earlier, that they had to restart, this makes a lot of sense. But again, this should have been explained the second you guys restarted, because most everyone was still under the impression that this was what the game would be. And that is where the anger is coming from. I feel better about the game due to this statement, but yeah, you should have communicated this better. We realized that we should have switched out the Steam trailers consecutively as we developed the game, as I just said. For example, when the Horse Creator update came to the testers, we should have made a trailer from that and replaced it immediately. I agree. I will follow up on this and produce trailers as the game is updated over time. As an added note, we are revising the Steam page and removing the planned key feature section, as this turned out to be confusing. We are sorry for this mistake, and we are all doing what we can to revise and improve. The planned key features was a section on the Steam page which expanded on what the game would be in future. It had things like go on solo adventures, there would be exciting activities, and you can create unforgettable memories with your friends. Unfortunately, this led to a lot of players to think that this was what would be in the game now, and seeing as they were paying $25, you can't really blame them for thinking this. I won't say this was a misstep, as players are also responsible for reading descriptions on Steam pages. However, it did cause confusion and a lot of anger in players, as some felt duped. I'm glad they are removing this for the time being. To conclude, we are doing all that we can to kick the development of Astride into full gear. We appreciate all of the feedback we have received and are actively working to make fixes and improvements where we can. We will do everything we can to give back to the community with every new update. Astride is a passion project, our dream, and it is not something we will give up on. And there it ends. The price was not addressed. I'm guessing this has to do with the contract. Whatever the reason though, it's still far too expensive for what it is. However, in closing, this was a bad launch, not something we expected, and it knocked Astride off its feet. Players are rightfully upset, and it will take time for Astride to win back the trust they lost so easily. And for many, it will never be won back until the game is released, which is absolutely understandable. However, the rest of the document goes into some detail of their future plans. They are hiring a new programmer, they are working to expand the early access as quickly as possible, and they are promising to add player characters to the game as well. It's a big statement, and I highly recommend you go through it yourself if you are considering backing Astride or asking for a refund. I feel like this statement is a make or break moment for a lot of people who are considering to either retract support or give support. Overall, for myself personally, I am still going to back Astride. This was a misstep, but they took accountability to not only understand the player's upset, but also to do better. I feel they did explain themselves well, and they did try and give us as much of an explanation as they could, considering the situation with the government funding. But yes, the game is still very expensive for what it is, so personally, I would suggest staying away for a short while and coming back periodically to see if the game is up to a standard that you would consider is okay for the price tag, as the price will not be changing until it is fully released. And as of today, they've already added a brand new update, which includes a larger play area and a few tweaks to gameplay. So they've already started to update the game. And the way they handled this is something else I would like to briefly discuss. As an active horse gamer and gamer overall, I've personally seen the collapse of 2 discords due to developers who refused to acknowledge they were in the wrong. In this regard, the Astride team went above and beyond to not only take accountability, but also gave the space for people to express their upset. As far as I know, no one has been banned from the Discord, only timed out. As a result, the Discord's general feeling is one of middle ground, people trying to see each other's perspectives instead of attacking each other. Bad apples are everywhere, but the fact that they sat back and let us vent and scream helped so much to alleviate some of that upset and disappointment. I want horse game discords to look at this. I don't think a worse launch has been seen in horse game history. But instead of screaming at players and playing that deny game and pretending everything is fine, they stood up, took accountability, and are now working not to prove they are smarter or better than their players, but are instead trying to recapture the trust they lost. Whether this will happen depends on them and the players who have been burnt, but I am hopeful for the game if this is how they handle criticism. Badly done on the launch Astride, I'm disappointed, I won't lie, but well done for handling the situation with decorum, understanding and kindness. Although I am still a little wary, I do feel a bit more hopeful for the game, and I look forward to the next update. And to every other horse Discord out there, take note and learn how it's done, and stop trying to stay on your high horse and better than your players. Discords are places for community, not your ego.